In this video on railway history, I'm introducing Brunel's atmospheric railway, or his atmospheric adventure, and this was a development where Brunel attempted to use a new technology that had been developed by the two partners, Samuda and Clegg, or rather three, because originally it was Jacob and Joseph Samuda. And in 1838 they took out a patent which meant that they could produce movement using a tube into which a piston was fitted, and by exhausting the air in front of the piston, the air pressure behind pushed the piston forward, and when that was connected to a carriage running on rails either side of the tube, then it could propel the vehicle along. So that meant that they could effectively propel a train without needing a steam locomotive, or indeed a horse or any other form of motive power actually sitting on the rails. In other words, the production of the energy to move the train was moved off the track and into stationary pumping engines which exhausted the air in front of the piston. And these are images showing the piston in its original configuration, or the concept of the original configuration, with just a simple four-wheeled vehicle with a piston fitted underneath that ran in the tube, and a bar came up through the tube, a longitudinal slot ran along the tube and connected to the driver's carriage, and then the passenger carriages were then attached to the driver's piston carriage. And on this top-down view you can see where the track is in normal configuration, but with this tube with a piston running through it. And if we have a look at the view from end on, it's very clear to see how it's meant to be configured with the driving carriage, with the piston in the tube and with the wheels of the carriage either side. Well, this was it was demonstrated 1840, and there were a lot of discussion, a lot of interest in it, of course, because it's a revolution. It was a revolutionary form of propulsion, and eventually it led, in 1841, they produced, Joseph Samuda produced a treatise on the whole atmospheric railway principle, and they finally patented the whole system in 1844. The Dublin and Kingstown Railway had opened in 10 years earlier, running from Dublin to what is now Dunleary. That was then Kingstown, and it was standard gauge, it was British standard gauge, 4 foot 8.5, later converted to 5 foot 3, Irish standard gauge. And the line was extended. They wanted to extend the line to Dalkey, and this was eventually done, but it was done on the atmospheric principle. And this ran very successfully, and Brunel actually went to see it, and he was very impressed by it. And it was actually opened in 1843 on the 19th of August, and normally they achieved about 30 miles an hour, and then that was going up the gradient to Dalkey, and then it just ran back by gravity. 35 trains a day, back and forth. And on one occasion, allegedly, the brake was released on the piston carriage when it was not attached to a train, and the piston carriage with one man on board allegedly achieved a speed of about 65 miles an hour. So that showed how powerful this could be. It was also developed into on the continent in France, but the first major application in Britain was the London and Croydon Railway, and that was developed in 1839 from the Act of Parliament in 1835, and eventually it was running on the atmospheric principle. And because it was impossible for the atmospheric line to pass the cross over an ordinary railway line on the level, then it led to the development of the first flying junction at Norwood, and it was a very successful line as far as it went. Finally opened in 1845 using stationary steam engines, and but lasted for a comparatively short time because of various technical difficulties, as with any new technology. And it was brought to an end in 1847 and converted to a conventional railway soon after, mainly because of the impossibility of integrating it into the developing railway network across South London and the suburbs, and of course the cost of maintenance. However, by then Brunel had persuaded the South Devon Railway to adopt the atmospheric system, and he eventually built the line from right the way through to Newton Abbot, and the idea was to extend on from Exeter beyond Newton Abbot to right the way through to Plymouth, but it only ever got as far as Newton Abbot before the problems with the system finally revealed that it wasn't going to be practical, and the whole system really opened. They were experimenting with it in late 1846, and it finally established a service 1847 and into 1848. Basically, it's only running from Exeter to Teignmouth, so shorter than Newton Abbot. There were a whole series of problems, but the primary problem was that the longitudinal valve, which used leather as part of greased leather as the way of closing the valve, essentially what you've got is a long tube with a slit in the top, and you've got to keep that slit closed except when the piston is running along it. And when that began to perish because of the sea air, the apocryphal stories of seagulls and rats eating the leather, all the rest of it, but mainly it's the sea water and muck getting into the pipe that caused the problem, and eventually it just proved so expensive to replace that longitudinal valve after such a short length of time that the whole system was abandoned and converted to a conventional broad gauge 7-foot gauge railway. But of course, because of the performance, the very good performance of the atmospheric railway, when it did function, and it did function very well when it was new, very fast, very quiet, an efficient system. But because of that, Brunel had built the line using fairly tight curves, single track throughout, with just passing places, and quite severe gradients, and that was the legacy left of the South Devon Railway to pick up the pieces. So it was certainly an adventure by Brunel. It wasn't his invention. I mean, he's always associated with it, but it wasn't his invention, but he did argue very much in favour of it, being one of those men who was really keen, one of those engineers really keen on the any innovation that was taking place, and very interested in new technology. And so the final few pictures here are of the remains of the tube, and they do have a portion of the tube preserved at the Didcot Railway, Great Western Railway Society Didcot Centre, Great Western Centre, and you can go along and examine it there. And but you'll also see how the reasons why it failed, because basically of that great longitudinal tube. This is my collection of models to make the South Devon Railway as an atmospheric route. This I positioned on my one day to be completed route of the South Devon line in broad gauge days, but I've adapted this little spot, which is actually Dawlish Warren. Just put down some track very quickly just to give the general impression. There's plenty more to do here, of course. This is the piston car that was used by the South Devon, and you can see here that it's just running on ordinary Great Western track, but because it has no motive power of its own, it can't actually propel itself. And what they would do is they would have a piston at the side of the track in a tube, which you can see here, and this tube would have a piston running through it, and the chain would be connected to the front of the piston carriage, and the piston would run forward and it would pull the carriage forward, and into the tube for the main track. And so here's the track which I've modelled, which is the Great Western Broad Gauge track with the piston tube already fitted, and this is a separate model of the station tube used to propel stationary trains forward. And I've also provided the supply tube because this is my model of the pumping stations that were designed by Brunel and installed at various places, including Starcross and Dawlish, amongst a number of others. So it's possible for you to recreate the South Devon Railway as an atmospheric line, or indeed any other route that you fancy as an atmospheric line. But this was the prototype, as it were, or the most commonly ones that most people commonly refer to. And you can see here also in the pumping station, the chimney is made to look like an Italianate campanile, and you just add smoke to that if you wish to have it working. But of course these stood for many years. These started work in the late 1846 and finished work in early 1848 when the system was abandoned, and but they remained standing for many years, used for a variety of purposes, and parts of them are still standing. Part of the one at Starcross, the campanile, has been chopped down, and there's a number of others along the route. So there we are, there's Brunel's atmospheric railway. You can bring it back to life in Train's Railway Simulator. So I hope this railway history video introduction to the whole concept of the atmospheric line has been of interest, and that you can be inspired to have a go and realise that it wasn't such a crazy scheme that Brunel wanted to use in order to power the South Devon Railway. So please subscribe to my channel, and please comment on this video if you wish. Give me a thumbs up if you like it, the information, and I hope it leads you into further exploration of Brunel's wonderful broad gauge atmospheric railway.